guys, it's good to see you. I put on makeup today, so I decided to put my face on here for a change. Today we're going to talk about mood disorders for a little bit. But before I start talking about the two mood disorders we're going to address, I just want to go back and talk a little more about mental illness in general. First of all, we're starting to find more and more and more that mental illness is biological, it's genetic. There are some disorders that are more environmentally based, like PTSD and so forth, but even they may have a biological predisposition. And the reason I mention this is because there's such a stigmatism towards mental illness. People treat people with mental illness as if they're just not trying hard, when really there's biological underpinnings for a lot of these things. Some more than others. Some are super biological or completely biological. Others are less so. And as I mentioned last time, as you're going through these, if any of these sound particularly similar to an experience you're having or a loved one is having, don't be surprised. I did a survey at SWIC. I want to say 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 students at SWIC said they had been diagnosed with a mental illness. So they're incredibly common. There's this stigma from the media that you would just be able to look at somebody and know that they have a mental illness. But the fact is, most people with mental illness can function very well throughout the day. And you would never know from their behavior what's going on inside for them. So try to be sympathetic. The other reason I mention it is because there's a big stigma against taking medication. I don't think we would treat somebody with a heart condition that way. You know, we'd like, oh, suck it up and don't take your heart medication. But sometimes medication can be the only thing that might improve the quality of life for someone. And that varies a lot. Some people really hate the medication. The side effects are worse than the condition they're dealing with. And so that's certainly an individual choice that you have to decide. But never let other people make that decision for you, or don't worry about the stigma of other people, because you could be really improving the quality of your life by looking into medication and therapy. Okay, so I think that's in general what I wanted to say. So the two mood disorders we're going to talk about are depression, incredibly common disorder, and bipolar disorder. All right, so we'll start with depression, and same as last time, I have put the Diagnostic Statistical Manual criteria up here. The DSM is the great big book that all psychologists refer to when diagnosing. And so you can see it listed up here, and again, pause the screen if you want to read these more slowly. But probably most of us can at least relate a little bit to depression. We may not have clinical levels of depression, but we've probably all experienced a lot of these symptoms. And if you notice at the top, you don't qualify as having a major depressive episode unless that lasts for 2 weeks and really changes your basic functioning. So you're very depressed, you've lost interest in things you used to like, you've stopped enjoying things you used to like. Okay. Usually see a change in sleep. You see a change in eating. You see fatigue. Guilt is a big common one. Obviously, sadness is another emotion that goes with that. You see down here what we call death ideation. And it may not be that you have a thought out plan for suicide, but maybe you're just thinking, boy, it just would be nice if a bus would hit me or something like that would be an example of death ideation. And so you can read these definitions. But for some people, this is very environmental, like maybe a loved one died, so you go through a period of depression, and maybe you don't have any genetic tendencies. But for some other people, there's a really strong tendency in your family. Maybe you see a lot of drug use or alcoholism in your family, and that might be, a genetic tendency towards depression that people are trying to self-medicate themselves for. So, for example, I know people who, their life can be going great, but they still feel depressed just because it runs biologically in the family. And it doesn't matter what they do, they're going to have those symptoms of depression unless they find a medication that works for them. And that can be really difficult. psychoactive medications used to treat mental illness sometimes have a lot of side effects. I think sometimes doctors start with really high doses and people have a bad side effects, and so they're like, oh, I'm not going to try this anymore. You have to understand from the doctor's perspective that if you're very depressed, they want to make sure you don't commit suicide, so they maybe start too high. But I've known people that have had to try for years to get the right medication, but once they do, the quality of life is amazingly better, and the right dosage of the medication. So everybody's body is different. So what works well for one person is going to be entirely different for somebody else. So don't give up if you've been looking, and keep that in mind. All right, let's go ahead to go to bipolar disorder. If I can get this working. There we go. Okay, so bipolar disorder has all the things we just talked about in depression. They'll have all those experiences, but you're adding on manic episodes. So you have these manic episodes are the person feels fabulous. They feel great. They're incredibly self-confident. They're sure nothing could go wrong in their life. They come up with these amazing plans for, big things, and nothing can go wrong. They don't sleep very much. They talk a lot. They talk very fast. They don't need much sleep. They feel like they're very productive, but they can be jumping around a lot and not focusing well. They tend to do a lot of risky behaviors, be they sexual, drug use, spending, and other kinds of risky behaviors. I'm thinking of a couple of students I had in the past that told me they were bipolar. One of them bought like a $40,000. He had been on medication for years, and he was doing really well on that medication. And like many people do, he just decided, I'm probably over it now, and I can go off this medication. But bipolar is a lifelong thing, and it's so biological. It is not, an environmental thing. It runs in families like crazy. So he went off his medication, and he went out and he bought a $40,000 motorcycle and crashed it the same night. And so his parents ended up, paying for that because he went off his medication. I had another student said she gambled away $13,000 in one night. My aunt married a man that was bipolar. His mom was bipolar, and 4 of the 5 kids ended up being bipolar. And so one of my cousins, again, life was going great. He had a lovely wife. They just had their first baby, and he hit a depressive phase, and, he hadn't been on medication, and he went into the back of a church and shot himself. And so that baby had to grow up without a parent. And think about this. This is one of the disorders that's it can be very difficult for people to stay on their medication because mania feels fabulous. So imagine I give you this pill and I say, you're going to take this pill and you're never going to feel as good again as you have in the past. You're never going to be as depressed as you have been. But the goal is to kind of level out those emotions. And so mania feels great, but it's when the risky behavior happens. It's when people make terrible decisions, oftentimes. And so it's hard for people to give up that amazing feeling of euphoria that comes with mania. And so they often go off their medication thinking they can control it, much like a drug addiction, if you will. But it's always going to be there. Bipolar is completely biological. And really, you can have therapy to help you cope with it, but you really have to be on the medication to level out the moods and the behavior. Okay, so that's it for bipolar, and we already talked about depression, so I'm going to pause here, but those are mood disorders. Obviously, extremes of mood are what we're talking about. All right, I hope you guys are doing okay. I sure do miss seeing you face to face. And boy, I hope next semester or something, at some point you come by and visit me and tell me how you're doing, because I'd love to see y'all again. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.